Can you introduce yourself to start?
Yes, Matthew Mannion, Mannion Auctions, LLC.
Okay, great. So you run auctions. Tell us a little bit more about what you do.
Yes, I run many different types of auctions, UCC auctions, judicial auctions for mortgage foreclosures. I auction off co-op apartments, tax medallions, and pledges of equity for large residential and commercial buildings.
Okay. You have been very busy. I know this because we've been trying to schedule this for 2 months.
Yeah.
But no, I'm not trying to criticize you. But tell us, why have you been so busy and how does it compare to previous years?
So I think there's a couple of reasons why auctions are on the rise. I mean, I don't think it's a surprise to anyone that there's a lot of distressed assets out there, specifically real estate. You're seeing office space being valued far under what it had been pre-pandemic. And I think couple that with the pandemic, and I think that we're getting a lot more auctions these days than we ever have.
Give us a sense of numbers. How many did you do in the last week, for example?
Okay, so in the last 2 weeks, I've done about probably 12 to 15 auctions.
Okay.
Of various items. So I did one tax medallion auction, 5 co-op auctions, couple in the city. I'd work in Westchester and Long Island as well for co-op auctions. And then, we did the Cohen Realty Enterprises one with Fortress a couple weeks ago.
Okay, so 15 in the last week. How does that compare to, 5 years ago?
Right. So just anecdotally, so 2019, 2018, I probably would average 12 to 15 UCC auctions of pledged membership interests, or MES, which are what these larger ones are, like the Cohen one. I even do about 12 to 15 of those a year.
Okay.
Co-op separate, not talking about that.
Right.
This year, I'm on track to do 75 to 78, depending on which auctions actually go or get canceled.
Right. It's a fairly large uptick.
Right. And so I think I'm lucky enough to have a little bit more market share than I did back then, which helps. But even with that, the only explanation, in my opinion, for why you get 5 times what we used to in a year would be that there's a lot of distressed assets out there that are not performing.
Right, which we know, we're just seeing that play out.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. And I want to get a little bit of your background. So how did you get into this? I know you were a Marine and now you're an auctioneer.
Yes, yeah. And there's no better preparation, honestly.
I was going to say, is that a paid sign?
I think it actually might be. Yeah. A lot of things you learn in the Marine Corps to be a good officer, you have to you can take that to auctioneering. It helps out. Mostly just being loud. Yeah, yes, that's it. I did I was an active duty infantry Marine officer from 2012 till 2017. And time decided if I was if I wanted to stay in the Marine Corps long term or look at other opportunities. So my father took over this company in the 90s from the founders.
Okay.
And that was an opportunity. Thought about maybe going back to school. And I figured, let me try this out and see if I like it. And I knew I loved it.
Really?
Yes, I loved it. Ever from the very beginning, I loved it.
Okay.
Yeah, it's great. It's different. You're doing different stuff all the time. You're going to help out different people, lenders, attorneys, brokers, and it's something new every day, which I really value.
I can see that.
Yeah, rather than the same thing every day, get monotonous.
Totally.
Yeah, which I want to avoid that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. That's how I got into it.
Okay, cool. So you mentioned a few minutes ago UCC foreclosures and judicial foreclosures.
Yeah.
Judicial foreclosures, tell us what they are.
Okay, so, there's a lot of different types of judicial foreclosures. The typical one is foreclosure of a mortgage. Name the lender, Citibank, Wells Fargo. You get a mortgage from them. You're not paying your mortgage. They give you some warnings that they're going to foreclose on you. And then if you continue not to pay, they go through the judicial process in New York State. Every state's different.
Right.
But in New York State, they would start a judicial foreclosure on you. And they essentially have to get a judge to sign a document saying that they're going to be auctioning off your property. Mm-hmm. And then it goes through the court system. And there's a RPAPL, Real Property Actions and Proceeding Law. And that lists exactly what you have to do a foreclosure.
Okay.
It has basically a checklist. It's more in depth than that, but they lay it out pretty well. Whereas the UCC, there's guidelines, but they're quite vague, and the major bridge you have to cross is you have to do the auction in a commercially reasonable manner, and they leave it at that.
Okay, right. And I remember that came up, and we can speak about this generally, but in the Fortress Cohen auction. But I'm going to go back. So UCC is a foreclosure on, fill in the space.
It can be on many different things, but in a situation like that auction or another UCC auction, it's on pledged collateral. And so instead of a mortgage, it's a pledge.
Right.
And that's the difference. So you have one line is a mortgage, and that's a judicial foreclosure, and the other is a pledge of membership interests of an LLC or an entity, and foreclosing on what that entity owns. So it could be real estate, it could be intellectual property, it could be, and I've done this, a warehouse full of sneakers. That's the collateral that you're auctioning. And so a lot of times it's real estate. That's what I specialize in, but it can be whatever the pledged collateral would be.
Right. Okay. So I'm thinking about it as, like, we know that most buildings are owned by an LLC. They're not actually owned by the actual owner. So you're foreclosing, or not you, but the lender is foreclosing on the interest, the membership interest in that LLC.
Yes. Yeah. The LLC that owns the property pledged its membership interests for that pledge agreement, which is essentially a loan. And then that pledge agreement, if you go in default, like you would default on a mortgage, then the lender has the opportunity to foreclose on the collateral that you pledged, being the building.
Okay.
The key point there, though, is that it's not, because it's a pledge, it's not real property technically. It's personal property. And that's the difference between why you can use the UCC versus judicial.
Okay. I think we've made that as clear as humanly possible.
I think so, yes. As not an attorney.
Well, no, it was good. We did a good job. Okay, so tell us the benefit of a UCC foreclosure over a judicial foreclosure.
Speed.
Yeah.
I would say speed. And this is, again, for, every state's a little different. New York State, certain counties can take a long time. Perfect example is New York County, Manhattan. Even after a judge signs a document, the judgment of foreclosure, stating that we can foreclose on someone's property, the earliest date you're going to get on the calendar could be 5 months from now for the first date. And so if you can get that date canceled, then you're at 10 months or more. Whereas UCC auction, you can do if you have the right team in place in the beginning, you could do a UCC auction of very large collateral in 90 days. From start to finish.
Yeah, that's fast.
Very fast. Whereas judicial foreclosure, a debtor that has deep pockets and good attorneys can stave off some 3, 4, 5 years.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's a long time. And I imagine if you are the lender, whoever your debtor is, like, they're maybe still not paying their loans. So the debt is getting larger as time goes on.
Yeah. I mean, commercial properties in New York is 24% default interest rate.
Yeah, that's incredible.
And so it's very high. And so if you're a lender and you're just eating that 24% year after year after year, all of a sudden, all the equity you had on that property is eaten up by the court system taking too long. And some counties are better than others. And we've seen this delay start during COVID. Before COVID, it was not, the delay I was talking about, the 5 months to get on the calendar, is not on the court calendar. That was not in place before COVID.
That happened with housing court too. Is that just because the courts were, like, quasi shut down for a period of time?
I think so. I think also it's a way to slow the process down a lot and let people maybe get a loan or have a chance to redeem what they owe to the bank. And it's also a way to say that the courts are open and they're moving at a snail's pace.
Right, they're functioning, but maybe not well.
Yes. I mean, there was one county, I'm not going to name what it was, but they said they were open for foreclosures for 2 years and they would have maybe 20 or 30 a year, and that was it.
Oh, wow.
Which is not, I mean, there's some counties where you could have 20 sales on the calendar in one week.
You mentioned commercially reasonable with the UCC foreclosure. And when I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking about commercially reasonable came up with the Cohen Realty Enterprises auction, which is tied to Charles Cohen, and Fortress was doing the foreclosing there. And basically, it was something that had to be decided in the courts. I'm not going to ask you to speak about that auction specifically, but what does commercially reasonable mean and why does it matter?
Well, it matters because if you aren't acting in a commercially reasonable way and you get challenged, you have to go in front of a judge and defend the actions you took and why you think they were reasonable. If the judge disagrees with you, the judge could levy any number of things, delay to the auction, not allowing you to do it for, a year or more. And not to mention, you also then are going to be incurring a lot of legal fees from the attorneys. That's why it matters if it's commercially reasonable. What does commercially reasonable mean? It totally depends on the collateral you're auctioning. Where's the collateral located? Is it in California or is it in New York? And what's the value of the collateral? Is it $1 million or is it $250 million? Because that matters. It does. If you're marketing $1 million, we'll call the underlying collateral as $1 million building. If you're marketing that building, you're not going to spend $250,000 on a top flight broker, but you would if it was a $250 million building. And so it's kind of a moving target depending on what the collateral is. Okay. And so that's why you have to have the right counsel, right broker, and right auctioneer to make sure that you're crossing that threshold.
Right. Okay. And does it have to do with advertising? Like I remember in the Cohen auction, there was this talk about like marketing and did enough people see it? And was there enough time for people to I don't know, get their bids together, things like that?
So in a general sense, not talking directly about that matter, but in a general sense, yes, there's certain things you would look at for commercial reasonability. One would be advertising, publications, or marketing. So in addition to hiring a top broker to market the auction, you also need to publish. So that's another thing that I help our clients with is we publish in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal. Sometimes they're required by the origination document that you have to publish. And so Commercial Mortgage Alert, even The Real Deal. We send a lot of ads to The Real Deal for publications of course, because it gets eyeballs. It gets eyeballs of people in the real estate world. And so that helps move that marker towards commercial reasonability in our favor. If it's a piece of real estate that's the underlying collateral and we publish in The Real Deal or Commercial Mortgage Alert or something like that, it gets eyeballs from the real estate community.
Right. Okay. So we sent a reporter to the Cohen Fortress auction, and she said it was quite quiet as far as, other bidders showing up. And you don't usually think about that with auction. Like, I feel like people have this perception of auctions where it's like they're so rowdy and crazy, and maybe also because the Flatiron auction was, but that was an anomaly, right?
Yeah, the Flatiron auction, I mean, anytime you have a trophy asset like that going up for auction, it's going to be a bit of a circus, which it definitely turned into.
Right.
For a number of reasons.
It was a two-parter, too.
It was a two-parter. Jacob Garlick was the first bidder. Infamous Jacob Garlick. He won the auction at $190 million and then failed to come up with the required deposit in the time frame allocated. And so we had to redo the auction a second time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Has that happened to you often?
No. Typically, even for auctions for collateral valued far less than the Flatiron Building, a deposit is required at the auction. Sometimes it's nominal, just a couple percent points of what the collateral might be valued at. Sometimes it's 10%. Rarely you see more than 10% at an auction for distressed assets. But no, that does not happen a whole lot. Yeah, that was a very, very specific situation.
Right. And that was a judicial auction, I think you just told me, but it was a three-party ownership.
So that is a judicial auction. It was a judicial foreclosure, but it wasn't a traditional it wasn't a mortgage foreclosure. So it wasn't a foreclosure due to non-payment. It was ownership group disagreement.
Okay.
So if you and I owned a property 50-50, I wanted to sell, you didn't.
Yeah.
We would, disagree. We go to arbitration. Then a judge would say, sell the property.
Right.
That's kind of what happened there in layman's terms.
And then that happens on the that happened on the courthouse.
On the courthouse steps. I'm on the courthouse steps all the time. Co-op auctions. Yep. I'm out there in the winter, freezing, 10 degrees. I know. Yeah. Those aren't so fun, but sometimes you get there.
But the co-op auctions can be not fun, but they can be a little rowdy.
They can get a little rowdy. I've had I was doing one auction on the courthouse steps probably 5-6 years ago. It was in the winter, and I'm running through the auction. I'm doing it, and the debtor, the person who's co-op I'm auctioning, runs up on the steps with a bunch of papers, waving in air, stating that the property is in bankruptcy, and that they can't hold the auction. And I get the papers eventually, and they were just printed off of Google, like just trying to stop the auction any way they can. That happens all the time. I've had people call me and pretend that they're the law firm that hired me, stating that the auction's canceled, and then I call the law firm and they say, no, that wasn't us. Yeah, so you get
Interesting.
You get some cast of characters.
Yeah, that's kind of unhinged behavior.
It's a little bit.
People care about their co-ops. Like, is that there's sort of like a passion behind those auctions?
Yeah, I mean, it's sad. A lot of those folks, it's their primary residence or their secondary residence, and so there's definitely a personal attachment to them. Even if they're not $100 million property, it's their home. Again, sometimes they're primary, sometimes it's not. But yeah, there's definitely an attachment to the co-ops.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, so let's go back to UCC. So that went back to Fortress in a credit bid. Can you explain what a credit bid is?
Okay, so in general terms, a lender, a secured party that entered into an agreement with a borrower, provided financing in some way, all right? And so then eventually if the borrower stops paying, they're in default, okay? And so that lender has a credit for all the default that the borrower is now in. And so instead of, third-party bidder would have to show up with a deposit, right? Which the Flatiron Building did not require, which is why it was kind of a problem.
That's how it happened.
Yeah. And so you would need a deposit, a good faith deposit to say, I'm going to put 10% down or less at the auction and move forward towards closing. Mm-hmm. And so a secured party wouldn't need to put that money up front because they're already credit what they're owed.
Right. Okay.
So they're credit what they're owed.
Gotcha.
Yep.
And they can be quite low. Like there can be $1,000 credit bid, right?
I've seen credit bids ranging from very nominal bids up to 3/4 of what the lender might be owed. Okay. And everything in between. There's a lot of reasons behind closed doors from what I'm not privy to between counsel and lenders on what they might want to bid or not bid. I provide my experience of what I've seen other lenders do, but there's certain reasons why a lender would bid a certain amount that sometimes I'm not aware of.
Got it. But there is a clear reason why a lender would bid lower, right? And that's transfer tax.
Yes, yeah. So that is one reason for sure. Is in certain states, you have to pay transfer tax based on what you bid, and sometimes it's on the full debt. Again, not a lawyer, but that is a consideration that all lenders should take in consideration and do with the right counsel for what they're going to bid.
Gotcha.
Yep.
Because as you go up, as it's more money, like the transfer tax is higher, and then of course too, like if you're bidding $1,000 versus $10 million, that's a big.
Yeah, it's a percent, and it's a percent of either the debt or the bid, from my understanding. And yeah, if it's $1 million, you're paying transfer tax $1 million. Not that bad. If it's $500 million, that's a material amount of money.
For sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Have you seen credit bids become more common? Have they always been common?
Credit bids, yeah, they've from my experience, they've always been common because it's at the end of the day, it's the entity providing funding in the beginning of the relationship. The borrower didn't uphold their part of the relationship, and so the lender has a credit for what they're owed. Okay. And so they naturally wouldn't need to put any money up front for a bid based on the fact that they're owed the money in the first place.
Okay, gotcha. Going to throw this one out there because I cover it pretty closely. Have you seen any rent stabilized auctions / are you able to recognize when they are rent stabilized? Because it gets sort of wonky when you...
So I've done co-op auctions that are rent stabilized. And so you'll have a beautiful unit on the Upper East Side that will sell for pennies on the dollar because there's a rent stabilized occupant. And so based on the rent stabilization law that I'm aware of, you can't force them out, even if they're in default.
Yep.
And so they're there until they either pass away or if they hand it off to a family member. And so I know some investors that have purchased rent stabilized co-ops 10 years ago that still they're paying the monthly maintenance for the occupant. And and they're just waiting for someone to, vacate the premises.
I know that's the way people put it, but it's you some
Yeah.
okay, that's interesting. All right, so the more auctions is tied, you touched on this, but to office distress. We've seen it's hard to tell like where the tipping point with that is in New York, but I don't know, like is your expectation that we're going to see more foreclosures and more auctions?
I mean, look, I'm not a research analyst on what's going on macro office in New York City, but I'll tell you that based on the inbounds I have for early next year already, I don't foresee the next year or two slowing down at all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Beyond that, I wouldn't really feel comfortable making an opinion on it, but I'll tell you the next year or two, I would be shocked if it came to a full halt.
Okay. Are you able to see the pipeline also? Do you have insight into that?
Not really. I get brought in at different points in the process. Sometimes I get brought in very early on if they're maybe a year out from when they want to start actually engaging in a foreclosure, just so the lender can gauge price and, what kind of time frame they're working with. Sometimes I'm brought in 2 weeks before because they just need an auctioneer, and I wasn't involved at all in the beginning process. So my pipeline, it's kind of tough to say.
Yeah.
Yeah, not really.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay, and then last question. Do you have any auctions today?
I'm doing a adjournment announcement today at the top of the courthouse steps at 60 Center Street in Manhattan. But no, I don't have any. I had 2 today. One got canceled and one got adjourned. Okay. So no fireworks today.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, we'll let you go so you can get on to that. Thank you.
Thanks, Suzanne. I appreciate it.
Yeah.